As a medievalist, we're always looking for allegory, and really I just took that to, the ultimate point. And I was quite struck in this play that one of the reasons Shakespeare appeals to us so much is the constant mirroring, which is a kind of allegory where you see the image repeated in different levels, applying new senses. And he does this with his character to the nth degree, because not only are the male characters mirroring one another, the female characters are mirroring one another. He has four predominant male characters, the two twins, but then for the females, he has the two sisters, and then he also has Luz, who is a kind of a mirroring of Luciana. She's also referred to as Nell, and he has the prostitute. So Shakespeare is always challenging our assumptions of identity, always reminding us that when we think we've fixed on one aspect of the person, that's exactly when we've lost them, because we're forgetting about the other dimensions.
That's absolutely right. When I was directing the show, I like to think of Adriana and Luciana as almost this third pair of twins in that they kind of complement each other in the way the two antitheses complement each other. One is very decisive and very secure in her life, and then Luciana would be Adriana, and Luciana is a little bit more, it's got a little more head in the clouds, a little more poetic, it's almost like you have these two different parts of people that you would put together to get a whole with the sets of twins. You have the Antipholus of Syracuse and the Antipholus of Ephesus. The Antipholus of Syracuse is played by Becca. The handsome one. He's very head in the clouds. No, he's the other. I was going to say the other handsome one. The other handsome one. I was going to say
without the hair.
The differences between them are obvious. The Antipholus of Ephesus is, very stable. He's very grounded. He's a man of the town. He has a reputation to uphold and to think about. Whereas Antipholus of Syracuse, is traveling the world looking for his brothers. He falls in love with a woman now, but let's leave. It's all very catch as catch can. And neither of them are kind of a whole man as the play is presented. But when they get together at the end, you can kind of see almost there's a whole person coming together. It's just that the more and more you think about it, there are all these twins and all these parallels going on for the play. Adriana and the courtesan, with kind of another kind of pairing going on. The Dromios are interesting because the Dromios are a lot more alike. They're very similar to each other. And I think that's the way Shakespeare wrote it, because you kind of need those kind of stand-ins to be almost like the if anything, I like to think that the Dromios were the smartest characters. Even though they're the clowns and they're the fools, clearly. They're the smartest ones. They have the clearest sense of who people are and what is going on, and everybody's place in the world. And I kind of like to think that they were all looking down on all these kind of characters going on around.
I'd like to think that the two Antipholuses would act like one another if the roles were reversed.
Sure. Absolutely.
If you're at home and all these bizarre things are happening, it's going to lead to a different reaction than if you're the one searching for your twin brother. Really interesting, your background as a professional photographer, and I assume that has a lot to do with the powerful visuals.
Absolutely, yeah.
Portray the play, and whenever you see a play staged, you notice things in it you'll never notice just reading it, no matter how many times you read it. And a couple of things that struck me was the way the Duke was moved by the first words of Egion, that he was so despairing that it would be a comfort to him, there you are, comfort to him to lose his life. And you could really see a change in the Duke's attitude, that he started feeling more compassion for him. And not only that, he felt curious. What's the story? What's the narrative of someone who's feeling that despairing? And the more you told the story, the more interested you got. So you would try to stop it. You would want more. I thought that worked very well, and it reminded me of the theory that the 1001 Nights is the core narrative in our history of literature. If you think of Scheherazade about to lose her life, and she tells an interesting enough story. That is it the Shah she's telling the story to? The ruler she's telling the story to. She's smart enough to end with a cliffhanger, so he always wants to hear more stories. So I thought there was an echo of that at the very beginning. And something else, it was both visual and an aspect of the narrative that I thought was really striking at the end. You know, we're in the audience thinking, look, Antipholus of Syracuse, you're looking for your twin. Doesn't it occur to you? No, it doesn't. It's caught up in other things. And that's okay, because that always gives pleasure to the audience, to have the illusion that we know more than the character. Because, of course, the character knows the play better than we do in reality, but we don't think so. We like to feel smarter than somebody else. But at the end, who does it take to sort it all out? The Duke. Only the Duke has the wisdom. And that goes back to the tradition of court masks in Elizabethan England. The standard plot in a court mask was things go all to hell, and it takes the figure of the monarch to come on stage and solve all the problems at the end. There's often a lord of misrule character, and so it's a nice way to flatter the monarch. So this play was performed at court. An earlier play called A History of Error, that may have been an earlier version of this same play, was performed as early as 1576 at Gray's Inn and later at court. So that makes me think of that court mask genre. Ben Jonson wrote a lot of court masks that we still have that were published with his plays. It seems to me that this has...
That's really interesting. Yeah, that's fascinating.
There's something else that's also going on in the play, which is subtle, but it is there, which is there's a conflict that's going on between the feudal view of the world versus the bourgeois or the mercantile version of the world. And so in the beginning, it's actually really very strange that the Duke is so moved that he will not grant mercy. Because of what has happened in the other town. So his hands are, tied, which is a very strange thing to think about, because the Duke is the preeminent power in the town. And then at the end of the play, he does grant forgiveness. So obviously he could have done it at the beginning of the play, but there wouldn't have been a play at that point. But they're making a point that there is a certain order that has to be followed, and there are all sorts of hints in the play that things are really upside down, not only with the characters, but even the actual way the city is functioning. For example, Balthazar and Angelo are the merchants, and Balthazar, of course, was one of the three kings. And there are many, many allusions in the play. Oh, the three kings, the three wise men who bring the gifts to Christ. And there are many, many echoes in the play to all sorts of religious and spiritual dimensions. The Romeos are born in an inn. The resolution of the play comes at 33 years, the resurrection of Christ. And so throughout the play, there's this very, very subtle theme, which is a kind of a implicit and not really voiced criticism of this very materialistic world that these people are functioning in. And it's that kind of materialism that has impeded the Duke in the beginning from granting mercy, and then at the end he is able, because things have changed, he is able to then, and we're not really given an explanation why, but he is able to grant mercy, which was what was missing in the beginning. There was no mercy. And certain critics believe that this is actually Shakespeare looking at the new world that is growing up around him, where the feudal world is beginning to fall apart and lose its power, and a new force is taking over society, which is that of the bourgeoisie and commerce. So there's a very subtle criticism of that in the play.
I would say that a big joke among the cast backstage was that at the end, the Duke would say, well, then you're all Syracusans by proxy, so off with all their heads.
So okay, so it's 1,000, 2,000.
Yeah.
You guys have 8,000? Yeah, that's fascinating. Yeah, the business characters, the merchants, are very interesting. There are two of them don't even have names. This first merchant, which is played by Miguel. There at the very beginning, there's Miguel, and then the second merchant is played by Laurel back there. The second merchant actually makes a lot of the action. It's the second merchant who pushes to have Angelo arrested, and then Angelo pushes to have Antipholus arrested. So the second merchant is a very driving force in the show, but Shakespeare doesn't even give them a name. It's just they're just there. It's just the second merchant. It's very odd. Luce up in the tower gets a name. So the merchant doesn't. So it's just kind of it's almost like just another faceless merchant that Antipholus underestimates. Both Antipholus, they both completely underestimate it. They both. It's in the text. We kind of played it up because of everybody's difference. They both kind of try to almost bully the second merchant by their reputation or by their social standing, and it gets them nowhere. It just immediately it gets them nowhere, and if anything, it makes their situation worse by the second merchant just immediately turning on them.
As though they don't realize times have changed.
Yeah, exactly.
They don't have the same power they once had.
Yeah. Antipholus of Ephesus, Peter, when he's just being such a you can say. Yeah, exactly, front row. Such kind of a bully to the goldsmith and to Angelo, and then to the second merchant. Just I don't have the chain, just not even broken for a moment that they might have a point or that they have something. Just immediately goes straight to kind of anger and maybe just kind of like bossiness, and they don't hesitate for a second to arrest him. Have him arrested in his case. And that part of that has a lot to do with his rage. Antipholus of Ephesus just rage at how he thinks he is one person. He thinks there's this one man. He thinks has this position. He thinks the world works in this way. And it just is proved to him again and again that it is not. As the day goes on, rules that he thought were solid are less and less, starting with being barred from his house, which kind of leads us into. It's a really fascinating thing what happens to Antipholus of Ephesus, in that he starts the morning. He knows his life. He has his wife. He has his home. He has his business. He has this bit of a secondary life with the courtesan, where he's buying her jewelry and everything. Clearly an actual relationship. Probably, where it's money-making exchange and stuff like that. But it's not just, that didn't just happen that day. Clearly Adriana knew about that, in the past. And then all of those things are kind of just stripped away from him. When he's barred from the door and his wife won't even recognize him. And then as the day progresses, he loses his home and he can't get into his home. And Dromio's just needling him the whole time. And at one point, Dromio calls him, "You must feel like a slave to be so bought and sold," as he's trying to get into the house, which I thought was a really important line for Dromio to say to him. "Oh, you're right down at my level now. It looks like." And then when he tries to, he goes to the courtesan, but the chain that he ordered to show up doesn't show up, and then he's faced with Angelo, and is asking for the chain, and then his word means nothing anymore. He has his word. I'll give you the money. We'll go get the money, and Angelo's not taking it for a second. Where's the chain? So he's lost his home, and then he's lost his word. His kind of reputation in the town, and then he's arrested in the street. Just barely kind of controlling himself. And, eventually, the people around him they accuse him of losing his sanity when Adriana, the great Dr. Finch, yeah, fantastic. I loved having Pinch and the Duke be the same actor. That was really interesting. And he's in the town, and he's accused of losing his sanity. And at the end of the day, he ends up locked in a dark room. It's just fascinating, and he has to kind of claw himself back out from that. Literally, not. Yeah, please go ahead.
Was there any particular television evangelist that inspired you as Dr.
Actually, where the accent came from was I had just done a show, Last Days of Judas Iscariot, where I played a Judge Littlefield, who was this kind of Civil War character who was presiding over Judas Iscariot, and Josh liked that, and we came up with some ideas. See where we're going there.
Yeah.
I added him to ask some snake hamburger into that.
But, you know, it's something we're familiar with.
Yeah.
It's
Oh, yeah,
There's a
absolutely,
whole
yeah.
story, implicit narrative in that. I just want to add to what Elisabeth said about some of the biblical themes, because I think it's something that is kind of below our radar these days, but if we put ourselves back in Shakespeare's day and assume we're all going to church every Sunday or else, and we're not only having the bishop's Bible read to us, we may be at home studying the Geneva Bible, but also starting in 1559, Queen Elizabeth decided instead of having the choir sing the hymns, the whole congregation would sing the hymns. And the hymnal they had was the Book of Psalms, but not the translation that was in either the bishop's Bible or the Geneva Bible, a separate translation that was intended to be sung. So it was called the whole Book of Psalms, and it went through 1,000 printings in the Elizabethan era in the next century. So throughout Shakespeare's works are subtle echoes of wording from the hymns, including in this play, that sort of, for the audience that were hearing these hymns sung all the time, it would not only make them think of the theme of that psalm, and in this case it's one of the penitential psalms, Psalm 25, but also I think the music is either explicit or implicit in every single Shakespeare play. I like the way you began with music, add music between the scene changes. I think music is a powerful way of communicating, and so hearing words that would make the audience think of music is another implicit way to think music.
Yeah, it's something that I feel the modern artists are really kind of keys to. We're so key to having like a soundtrack.
Yes, yes.
Most of the music we've heard tonight is Lebanese pop music with some Egyptian pop music. Turkish pop music is a little dour. I mean, they've got the same beats and the same. I mean, it's the same type of music. It's just a little melancholy.
But close to Ephesus.
Oh yeah, exactly. That's what we were going for. Kind of
Yeah.
for modern pop music from the same area.
Yeah, yeah. And everybody may not know that the source play that Shakespeare used was by Plautus, and the action did not take place in Ephesus, but Epidamnum, which is referred to briefly here. So setting it in Ephesus had a particular meaning, presumably because St. Paul spent 2 or 3 years in Ephesus and wrote the letter to the people there. He was in prison in Rome, the Ephesians, and there's also 3 chapters in the book of Acts about Paul's time in Ephesus. There were a lot of allusions to the wording of those chapters. Yeah.
Is there any evidence, anyone studied how Shakespeare transforms Plautus? It's not a one-for-one correspondence.
Oh, there are many, many differences. Yeah, it's much more
Because he does that in other
than
plays.
Plautus.
Yeah, there's only one servant. It's only one set of twins. There's not the servant. The most fascinating difference that I found, I didn't read the original, but I went on Wikipedia, is that is with the wife character. The wife is much more.
She's really rough Jewish.
Jewish.
Yeah, just over the top, if you can believe that. In this one, but at the end of the play, the 2 twin brothers have finally they're reunited. They've decided to leave the town and go live with the other twin, who was from, I can't remember, whatever the town the original twin was. And the play ends with the servant selling all of his master's goods, including the wife.
If anyone will have her.
Yeah, the final joke is, start the bidding at the wife if anyone makes any purchase, we'll have her. So that's the biggest difference. It's just fascinating that Shakespeare gets a lot of criticism for his treatment of female characters. And a lot of it's deserved, but I think it's really interesting that he went to such lengths to create at least 2, if not 3, kind of detailed female personas in this show. Adriana's really interesting that time. She goes through a similar voyage as her husband does, in that she wakes up in the morning thinking she has a husband and everything, and then that's kind of stripped away from her. Like she knows that he's having an affair with the courtesan, but it's with the courtesan. It's not anything. And at the end of the day, he's in love with her sister. Her sister seems fine with it. It's just an also very interesting thing. So I really like that Shakespeare took the time to put those characters in. And Luciana has great bits, and the courtesan has that little monologue to herself where you kind of see the courtesan's motivations and stuff. That didn't need to be there. Like it wasn't. There's not a huge punchline in that joke. So I really appreciate that. It's really fascinating. You would add that to the original story.
Can I beg your indulgence to say something about
Yeah,
who
sure.
I think
Go for it.
wrote this? I don't think you can look at the character of Adriana without realizing what was going on in the life of the playwright during the previous year. He had gotten the Queen's permission to travel to the continent for 14 months. While he was away, his wife gave birth. Just a couple of weeks after he left, she went to a physician asking for an abortion, which she did not get. So the husband, the playwright, was convinced it wasn't his. And when he got back from his 14-month trip, he refused to live with his wife for 3 or 4 years, despite the Queen's intervention on behalf of the wife, asking him, please. And it was this huge scandal because he was spreading the word that it wasn't his child, so it was causing huge embarrassment. So he puts on this play in that setting about a year after he got back from his trip, when he wasn't living with his wife.
You're saying like in the 70s, not in 80s.
Yeah, 1576,
This-
right.
yeah.
Right.
The first printed edition is not till what, 94? 15?
First print edition isn't until 1623.
Oh,
So
really?
this is one of the 18 plays of Shakespeare where the only text that survives is the one from 1623. But scholars, most scholars agree that it's inspired by this anonymous 1576 play called History of an Error. And that's all we know about it, the title, History of an Error, that they believe that it may have been the source play. Because so often the source play for the printed text we have of Shakespeare are much earlier anonymous plays. And most Elizabethan plays were published anonymously.
Would Plautus have been performed in Latin at like the Inns of Court or the court itself?
Yeah,
The
yeah,
university?
I'm sure he was. Yeah, and there are 2 Plautus
So
plays.
it might have been in the air, but,
Right.
and so people.
Right. And speaking of the Inns of Court, those were law schools. So there was one called Gray's Inn that the person who wrote this play attended, and it was performed there in 1576.
You had a question, Gretchen?
Wait, it's very delayed.
This is my stage manager, Gretchen. Gretchen Helfer. Send big round of applause for her.
I wanted to say something before, but I didn't know we could. You saw me jump.
You guys don't jump, so. You're the stage manager, when you jump.
When you mentioned about commerce kind of changing the world, and then the next thing Josh said was how the first merchant and second merchant don't have a name, maybe that was kind of like big business. Could be anybody. It's not a specific one.
Yeah, absolutely. Yeah, and the classes kind of merging, taking over that. Yeah.
That would be true in allegory, because you would not have as individualized a name if it's meant to be interpreted as an allegory. So you'd have a more generic name.
Yeah, it could go both ways. It could certainly go that way, that you wouldn't have the name, and therefore you wouldn't have the personal association. It would be more of an abstraction.
Like an idea.
Being merchant.
Yeah, exactly,
Yeah.
exactly. Just to write a little bit on the point that you just made, and it doesn't exactly have to do with it, but I just found it fascinating. Like you guys said, we did, Kat and I did the Spanish Tragedy just last springtime. Oh, it's a summer rather, which is a play written by Thomas Kidd. What's the year? Yeah, 1583. Just previous to this play, which was a very popular play at the time. It's a terrible tragedy. Everybody dies at the end. Like 13 corpses at the stage at the end. It's great.
It's just the king standing.
Yeah, it's basically the king is just left alive. But we found, and just going from that play to this play, and that play is kind of Hamlet turned inside out, which is kind of interesting, because Hamlet is clearly, like, a lot of Hamlet is lifted from that play, or transformed, I don't say lifted. But there are at least 3 instances in the Comedy of Errors that are direct jokes from the Spanish tragedy. Like direct line transfers. Like,
What, will you murder me?
yeah, there's a line where Antipholus of Ephesus says, is grabbed and says, what, will you murder me? Which is like the key line in the Spanish tragedy when Horatio is grabbed right before he, in fact, murdered. So I think the audience would have found that to be hilarious at the time. And so there are all these, and then there are 2 more allusions to the Spanish tragedy that we found that an audience who would have seen those plays would have immediately kind of keyed on to, and Shakespeare would have been kind of making fun of those original plays.
And the Spanish tragedy was the most popular and most performed play of the Elizabethan age. I mean, so much so that every couple of years it would hire new playwrights to write new scenes for it, because people had seen it so many times. Like, we actually had, there's a receipt from Ben Jonson, like, where he added a couple scenes in. you know, just to spice things up a bit. You know, it was, you know, we were saying it was sort of like the Pulp Fiction of the state, like people, it's like Pulp Fiction catchphrases all the time, like the Burger Royale stuff. And people apparently did the same sort of thing with the Spanish tragedy. So any reference to it, you know, in another piece, it would have been picked up on as funny.
Yes.
But now, of course, it's sort of lost it.
Yeah, and like the biblical stuff that we don't just pick up on, with references and numbers and associations that people would have like immediately keyed to that kind of,
Yeah.
they would just, it's just interesting.
Yeah.
And you have almost half the cast here from that.
Well, it's,
You have a good-
I like to work with the sandwich act. They show up on.
And one of the reasons we decided to do Coming of Errors is that after the tragedy, it was so common.
Yeah.
It was so tragic.
Okay, yeah.
Yeah, you just mentioned tragedy, but I think there is a theme of terrible, unspeakable loss in this.
Yeah.
Unspeakable loss of one's mother. And the men, the two brothers, express it in different ways. You did by saying you felt lost and dropped, what was it,
Drop of water. Seeking another drop.
And, you know, there's a paranoia about it too, the witch. There was something sinister, that's a reaction to loss.
Mm.
And you were kind of a manic way, and they lost their mother. And the thing comes together when the mother
Absolutely, yeah.
There's that idea.
Yeah, that's a really interesting point. And it's also interesting in that the mother, Amelia, is there.
She's
it's,
there.
It's completely
She
left
wasn't able to
unexplained
know.
why she is not mothering Antipholus of Ephesus and taking care of Gromio.
You shouldn't just notice him out.
Right.
Yeah.
No, it's, she has the line about, in her final line, she talks about rude fishermen of Corinth stole the sons from her and left her behind. So she got separated at that point.
But then they end up in the same town, you would have thought at some point.
They end up as babies in this.
They're passing by.
Yeah, but you're